So, hello everyone. I'm Patty Robinson, Faculty Director of Civic and Community Engagement at College of the Canyons, and I just want to say welcome again. As I said, we see a lot of familiar faces today. We are so happy that you are here. This is the last of our presentations for this semester's Civic Dialogue series, but don't walk away in despair, because we are actually in the process of already getting our lineup ready for fall. And so just again, as I've always given just a little bit of an introduction here, we are working together and as a group. Part of this has come out of a Bringing Theory to Practice grant, and I'm pleased to be working with two of my colleagues, Jan Connell and Kimberly Rosenfeld. And Jan and Kimberly, if you just want to unmute and introduce yourselves as well.
Sure, I'll jump in. Hi, I'm Kimberly Rosenfeld. I teach at Cerritos Community College in the Communications Studies Department, and I'm the Education Department Chair. And I work with Civic Engagement with Patty and Jan. And I'll turn it over to Jan.
Hi, everybody. We're so glad you're here. And it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful session. Again, I'm Jan Connell, and I work as one of the coordinators for 3CSN, who is proud to bring you this series. And I'm also, excuse me, a retired full-timer after 40 years as a counselor and other things at Cerritos College with Kimberly. So we've brought you the best of the best. And so I'll be quiet and let it go on.
So we again just want to tell you this, the way that the session is set up. The first hour, our presenters will be presenting. You can certainly type any questions along the way in the chat, and we can also monitor those and address them during the presentation. But at the same time, at the end of the presentation, we will also be asking for questions. And so certainly at that point, you can either unmute yourself, or Kimberly, Jan, and I will also be monitoring the chat. The second hour, for those of you who would like to stay on, Jan, Kimberly, and I will do a deep dive looking at some of the important points or the takeaways from the presentation that you would like to reflect upon. So again, for those of you who would like to continue on the second hour, just stay with us, and then we'll transition to that. So with that, it's my extreme pleasure today to be introducing two incredible people that we are very pleased to have join us, Dr. Bezette-Flores and also Dr. Noel Bezette-Flores. And so I'm going to read through their bios, and then we're going to turn it over to them. So Dr. Bezette-Flores currently directs the Master of Nonprofit Management graduate program at the University of Houston downtown, where he served as president for 7 years. Prior to that, Dr. Flores served as Deputy Secretary for Higher Education in New Mexico. Dr. Flores has also served as the CEO of Antioch University in Santa Barbara, and for 8 years as Executive Vice President and Provost at New Mexico State University. He was selected by Time Magazine as the top 100 Hispanics in the nation by former President George W.H. Bush as a Points of Light for Outstanding Service and a Hispanic Entrepreneur of the Year by the Pacific Business Journal. He has testified before Congress and before the U.S. Civil Rights Commission on financial aid and on immigration reform. He has recognition from the governor of New Mexico, the state legislature of California, and from the Texas Senate. He is the author of Latino Cultural Citizenship, Claiming Identity, Space, and Rights, and the Democracy, End of Democracy, and then also Civic Engagement and Citizenship in Higher Education, Reclaiming Our Civic Purpose. He is currently writing a book on Texas politics, The Texas Experiment, Politics, Government, and Transformation, to be published by Sage Press. We are also pleased to have Dr. Noel Bezette-Flores join us as well in this presentation. For the last decade, she has actively engaged the community with outreach, winning regional, state, and national honors for her service. She developed partnerships and supervised students in school districts and nonprofits, resulting in awards from the Texas State Teachers Association and the National Education Association. In 2001, she was appointed as the Assistant Dean and Director of Advising for the College of Public Service at the University of Houston downtown. In 2012, Dr. Flores was appointed as Executive Director for the Center for Public Service and Family Strengths at the University of Houston downtown College of Public Service, where she oversaw civic engagement and service learning projects. Her work is in this capacity culminated in the institution attaining the prestigious Carnegie Foundation classification for an engaged university. Dr. Bezette-Flores is CEO of Innovation Work, consulting firm for community-based development strategies and reorganization and leadership development. Her work is also committed to community service, as well as various aspects of community service that are part of her overall interest and passion. She co-founded Citizenship Month Houston, serves as Metro Academy Community Partner, and is active in the Mayor's Office of New Americans, United Nations Association Board Houston, HGI Consulting Centers, and Volunteer Houston. Dr. Bezette-Flores is currently serving as the Chief Student Experience Officer and Associate Dean at San Diego State University. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome our very talented and incredibly prolific presenters here. So we welcome you both.
Thank you so much, Patty. The honor's really ours. I'm very excited since I'm just coming back home to San Diego from a slight detour of about 30 years in Houston, and to be joining your network to engage in a very pertinent and exciting topic. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So most of our presentation today is going to be in reflection of what we've done, both our influences in service as well as the book and different aspects of the book that are relevant to our work. Our goals today are some of those key lessons and the work we've done in engaging citizens and bringing them as the central focus of what we're doing at the university, what we've done at the university, and becoming contributing members of the workforce. UHD's story, which we are both a big part of that narrative, and then our current work, which is sort of separate but still together. And we'd like to hear about what you're doing on your campuses. I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly for a moment.
Yeah, I have two questions for you, and if you could answer them in the chat, that would be great. So our question number one, has your campus continued its community engagement efforts during the pandemic? And I'll put these in the chat as well after, for those of you. So has your campus continued its community engagement efforts during this pandemic? And question two, has student engagement decreased, stayed the same, or increased during the pandemic? Okay, so if you can think about those for a moment and just type your answers in the chat, and let me go ahead and post those in the chat, if that's okay with you, Noel and Bill. If I do that, you want me to put those in the chat for everybody just so they have them?
That'd be great, thank you.
Okay, there we go.
So we're gonna share a little bit about our early experiences that influence. And while we're going through this, it'd be, I think, helpful for if all of you could reflect too on maybe what your early experiences were with service that may have led to a mindset about community and developing as a contributing member of your community. So I'm gonna turn it over to Bill and have him share a little bit about some of what the journey that he took that led him to where he ended up at UHD.
Just all of us at some point in time became involved in civic engagement. When I was 16, my father and mother were very concerned with a really anti Black and Latino initiative that was going on in the state of California. And so It was going to restrict public housing and the neighborhoods, the NIMBY approach of restricting anybody moving in. So I got involved with petition drives and getting people to sign on. I was early on, I started working in an aircraft plant. So as I was going to high school during the summers and my senior year at night, I worked in an aircraft plant. So I was a member of a union. I was a machinist, and that affected me very much. In fact, when there was a huge accident in the plant, and several people were killed, others were injured, and I was injured. That it influenced me to say, you know what, I could continue this and make a good living. I think I'm going to go to college, and so I became the first in my family to go to college. I brought that experience to UCLA when I went. I got very involved with the United Farm Workers Union. I heard Senator Chavez speak. My aunt, who was a Latina activist in East Los Angeles and published a newspaper and a magazine. She had Senator Chavez at her house for dinner. I got a chance to meet him, begin working as a volunteer, even as I was going to school. And that really helped me because I recognized that average people, not just Senator Chavez, but like the person I worked with, who was a farm worker, could be leaders, and there was much to learn from them. And so this whole notion of expertise had to be inverted, that we could hear and listen and learn from people that had very simple lives but made major contributions, just as my grandfather did and others. After graduation from UCLA, I went to Stanford. I was involved right away in nonprofits. I was also involved in the policy research center at Stanford. I left after taking my exams and before doing my PhD to actually work in the community. I ran a couple nonprofits. I formed a HMO and a network of health organizations, came back and changed my focus of my whole way of looking at doctoral work and became an activist scholar. And at Fresno State, where I went because that's where the tenure track appointment was, I formed a center to work and engage students in looking at pesticides, the impact of water pollution, cancer clusters, et cetera. Cal State Northridge, when I was dean, I formed a center which still exists, the Center for California Studies, to look at policy issues affecting Los Angeles and California. And at New Mexico State, I expanded dramatically the impact of the university, which is the land-grant institution, all over the state by consciously creating opportunities for people to engage and commission a report on it. Here's a picture, not of me. I do have a picture someplace of myself with Senator Chavez, but just, this past week was Senator Chavez's birthday, and Senator Chavez here on the left and Dolores Huerta, both of whom had a huge impact on my life. Next slide.
So I'm gonna
Wow.
talk about some of the similarities. We both grew up in Southern California, and I don't know if that had anything to do with what we experienced, but my influence also was similarly coming from my family and factory workers and experiences within factories, which sort of predates my work at the community colleges and university and my research experience. So my aunt was a cancer survivor who could not have children and worked in a Kaiser Aluminum and was one of just a handful of females there. So at the time, females were really sort of disenfranchised from the political sphere of the unions. And she grabbed a crane that was falling and held it for 2 hours and broke her back and saved 8 men's lives. And later became, very supported by the males in that factory, and became a secretary, and then ran for a local office and was a representative in the state of Washington, and was the original author of the Family Medical Leave Act that was later taken up by Foley and to the House is what we now know as the current version of the Family and Medical Leave Act. And so that really inspired me, and as a female, but also just as recognizing what some people don't have access to, and what we can do. She was not a college educated person. I was the first in my family to attend college. And as part of my research in Houston, started to work with immigrant populations. And that's one of the things that Bill and I aligned with, was our work in immigrant and refugee populations. And when I was first at U of H, I was doing research in the public schools. And then most significantly, the work that influenced me was what my students taught me when I was building an education department at Lone Star Kingwood and partnered with the University of Houston downtown. We connected with the state affiliation of NEA, TSTA, and they made access grants, service grants, which really opened up this whole universe for me about tying the student learning outcomes with service and community, and asking the students to become leaders in the community, to come up with projects. We did reading recovery, community gardens with the local school districts, and we ended up having a 98% graduation rate and a 96% placement rate, because our students were able to complete, with this partnership with UHD, their entire degree at an offsite location, not in the urban setting of UHD, but not only do their student teaching, but also do this service work with the professional affiliation support. And it was like they were doing on-the-job training every day, because they were out in the community, they were out in the schools, the principals watched them, they were developing a lot of those critical thinking skills and teaching skills, pedagogical skills. And it really helped them start seeing themselves in that role as future teachers. And they were, very well received in the community, and so were the projects. So we won the Texas Star Award for that partnership. And some of the key lessons in that for me was that college students could deepen their learning and tied into with a commitment to service. And they performed, graduated, and became contributing members of society. And many of them proudly became Teachers of the Year within their first 3 years. So it was a very exciting experience for me. I'm going to turn it back over to Bill.
We can skip this slide. I think everybody knows that there's been issues about democracy. The Economist ranked us for many years as a full democracy. Now we're a flawed democracy. Why don't we move to the next slide?
But there's a good sign there too, right?
Yeah.
Under the Biden administration,
yeah,
that we're actually supporting as a society now some changes. So
as we, with our involvement, both Noel and mine, we started working together with other presidents and with center directors in a variety of venues to basically reclaim our civic purpose. Next slide. And through that process, through both the Points of Light, because Noel and I chaired nationally the Points of Light higher education track at its national conference, and also through the Kettering Foundation that sponsored meetings of presidents and still is, and I'm still active in that. By the way, Harry's got a chapter, Harry Boyd, and then Otto Lee from the president of LA Harbor College, and Eduardo Ochoa, president of the CSU Monterey Bay. We decided to ask them, how is their campus? How does it engage students? How does it contribute to democracy? So each chapter is a case study on a different campus, or for the most, there's sometimes a center director and a president from the same campus. But we asked them to address that and give us some shared lessons. Next slide. Out of that, then Katrina Rogers and I wrote the introduction and the concluding chapter. Each of us wrote our own chapters as well. And these are the sort of recommendations from the book. I also have a checklist that you can use to sort of gauge where your university is at. But the key thing here is these came from the individual chapters. And we wanted to make sure that campuses are functioning really as anchor institutions to the degree that they can, consciously engaging students, recognizing faculty and honoring them, and staff and honoring them, and that we're consciously working, if possible, putting civic engagement in their mission and in their vision. And that's, go ahead, Noel.
Yeah. So John Dewey on democracy, the trouble is that we have taken our democracy for granted. We have thought and acted as if our forefathers had founded it once and for all. We have forgotten that it has to be enacted anew in every generation, in every year and day. And so part of the tenet of Bill's and my belief system is that the university is a catalyst to encourage students not just to engage civically, but to also have a commitment to community, and then and as a very positive side effect of that, we found out that they become contributing members of society and very attractive candidates in the workforce, because community and civic engagement prepares them not only to be engaged citizens, but also to be highly qualified and productive members of the workforce. So some of the ways in which we've identified that students are prepared are they practice democracy through some of these initiatives. They solve problems facing society and in the future. You know, Noel's work on pedagogy, because a lot of our students at University of Houston downtown were adult learners, says that people generally attach meaning and value to knowledge they acquire through experience. So it's really about that real world meaningful experience that was created, tying their learning to real problems, societal problems. And we would always say that we were engaging citizens so that they could learn how to identify problems to complex societal problems. Bill?
Yeah, the key thing in the book is that oftentimes regents and legislatures want you only to focus on career training. And there's a poll that says, all right, we have to be, there's a democratic purpose from the earliest times of public higher education, and even private and universities had a democratic purpose. How do we get back to that? Well, we argue that that's both of our missions, because it's not just to prepare citizens, but also to prepare careers. And it's not just for careers, it's also to develop the engaged citizens that will be the future leaders of our society. Next slide. You can see here, this is an older slide, but it gives you a sense that volunteerism and engagement actually helps you to get jobs and keep jobs during recessions. This was looking at the impact of the 2008 recession and who were able to get jobs and who were able to keep them. The more active, the more engaged, the more likely that they kept jobs. Next slide.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this is the Ask You, which most of you have seen, I think. It's, again, talking about the 21st century skills.
AAC and you, Bill.
It's AAC and you and Ask You together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you'll move to the next one. And employers want people who can think creatively and problem solve. And you can, this is from 2019, and it gives you a sense that they're particularly looking for interpersonal skills and problem solving skills. Next slide. No, the slide 4, come back.
Yeah.
No, right here. This,
yeah.
the
I'm sorry, everyone, my button's sticking. It's not me. I'm so sorry.
The 2019 Cengage study on career readiness, again, attention to detail, listening skills, effective communication, critical thinking. This is what universities do. But they learn particularly well through application, through project-based learning, and through engagement. And so as we consciously do this, so at UHD, a university that was 70% Latino and African American, HSI and a minority serving institution, we decided to do a strategic plan, putting it in the context of the community we serve and the students we serve. Next slide. We engaged, in fact, I sent out questionnaires, just 5 questions, very simple questions, to 25,000 people. I was brand new to Houston, and wanted to begin to get input from employers, from alumni, from students, etc. We then gathered that as a basis for our strategic planning. And through that process, we refocused, developed a new mission and a new vision. And the vision is that UHD will be a premier city university, engaging every student in high impact educational experiences and ensuring that students graduate with 21st century skills. And that then became a basis for creating HIPS and applied learning and civic engagement as central to our curriculum. So I thought it was important to model that as president. I consciously participated in AAC&U and in the President's Trust, in HAKU and ASCU and APLU and several other organizations. Through the Kettering Foundations, the National Leadership Forum, Noel and I, and also through the director, was Wendy Lawrence, who's also got a chapter in the book with Noel. We did public deliberations on important issues affecting a community. We created a President's Community Engagement Award and an endowed scholarship. Noel.
So as executive director for the Center for Family Strengths and Public Service, we focused research on the issues that were most concerning for our student population. We actually had homeless students attending UHD. We found them sleeping in libraries, and we're like, wait, there's an issue here. We had homeless right outside our doors. We were situated in the very heart. Our address is 1 Main Street. That means we're the very first and center of the city. And you know, all of the issues that come with being a very urban centric and commuter campus were right there around us. We were situated on the bayou. We had floods, we had water contamination. And so we started to query faculty, staff, and students about and having deliberations around these issues that concern them, and working with community leadership and the mayor on issues concerning the well-being of these communities. And some of these things organically started to emerge of, you know, hey, how can we incorporate what we want to do to serve the community, not just from a service-oriented perspective, but also through the curriculum, but then also through the dialogue and addressing the larger scale, the macro issues like socioeconomic inequalities and access to resources and economic disparity with racial tensions and all of these other really difficult broader societal issues. And we had some task force. We partnered with other institutions, other universities, to look at some of these issues, co-funded research, homeless youth initiatives, immigration forums. And we worked with the first year experience students to develop supports for our students coming in and weaving service and career all the way through their academic path. Some of the things we did here, helping the homeless with research, search, service, and action. On my left there in the forum is Dr. Santa Maria, who's now the Dean of UT Health College of Nursing, and they're still doing major scale initiatives here. They're actually doing COVID vaccinations. They've continued with the homeless work. Bayou Service Day, teaching science and service. That services piece is not there. We cleaned up the bayou. We tested it for pollution, and you know, we just all hands on. We had a presentation day for students around their research and just put it all together, and then invited in our local high schools who participated with the collegiate students so that they could start, you know, building a pathway and seeing themselves with applied work as part of our institution. And one of the major things we had was the big read. It was with the NEA, and we engaged 28 schools throughout Texas on around a book. We always had a freshman read, and Ernest Gaines happened to have been a visiting scholar, I believe, Bill, to UHD, and he had written A Lesson Before Dying, which was also on the approved big read list. So that was a really nice culmination to bring all that together. And at the same time, was about when we kicked off the Center for Critical Race Studies. And so it was a very vibrant time at the institution. I think, Bill, let's turn it back over to you.
So one of the techniques that we thought was important, and I particularly, because the UHD did not really, it only had 2 graduate programs. And I decided, and I went to the chancellor and to the regents, and they did not want to approve other graduate programs. So I said, well, we'll build them differently. We're going to work with employers to build the programs. And we developed both MBA with stackable certificates, with using the ACSB accreditation requirements, but also competencies that employers were telling us that there was a problem with any MBA that they were hiring that didn't have it, and they wanted it in. So we integrated it into our courses.
And in the intro class, I'd like to add, we integrated service. So all the entry level students in that program participated in service in their entry level course.
So there's an error in this slide, but that's okay. The MBA grew dramatically. It literally went from our very first cohort of 25, 32 the next year to 1,100. And if you see the next slide, by the way, the Masters of Nonprofit Management, we use the same process. The end result was just, today the MBA is the largest in half of the state of Texas. We got, as mentioned before, the President's Award, distinguished award, and as well for distinguished service, and also the Carnegie. Move on to the next one. And this shows you, we went to 1,000. Now it says here, okay, anticipated graduation. That was because we only had 30 students in the first cohort. Well, actually, the first 2 cohorts together, because we started in the summer and then in the winter. So that was the first cohort to graduate, but we already had by year 3 1,100 students, because it went from 10,000, 1,000 to 1,100. Our master's is now ranked, Masters of Nonprofit Management, because we formed that with employers who co-teach with us, just as in the MBA, and recruit for us. It is now ranked as the 4th best program in the country, the #1 in Texas, as well as #2 in the country in affordability.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important aspects of this is the applied component. So even in these online delivery mechanisms for curriculum, we were able to embed some component of service and applied work. And for adult learners, again, going back to Noel's work, that's the most critical piece of adult learning success.
Let's go to the next slide.
Here's a cohort of the MBA students, pre-pandemic though, doing a major initiative of service initiative together. They would also do assist with tax preparation and other things. Bill and I, Points of Light Award. And then some of the work we've done since UHD, I went on to Houston Community College and worked on a large-scale Service for Good program with Twitter in our community, and one of our poorest communities here in Houston, Sunnyside. The campus that I was overseeing was situated in the middle of Southside, Sunnyside, and we increased student participation in clubs, implemented 360-degree student support, worked with lots of community organizations, tried to similarly situate ourselves with our workforce programs and do applied learning, working with faculty, although at this point I was more on the student services side. We had our college students mentoring K-12. We were attached to a early college high school. And we worked with Be the Peace, Be the Hope as we moved into COVID to continue virtual. These are some hands-on face-to-face things that happened, but we did some virtual experiences, hearts online, sending letters to military online, and different virtual engagement supports. At SDSU, some of the goals we're working on for Global Campus are to integrate service, career, and internships into our learning. And I'm in a virtual environment building out 360-degree support services and trying to engage employers and alumni in these discussions of integrating service and competencies for workforce.
And, after being president, I was at UH as a fellow, then I went to Antioch University, did some work there and engaging them with the local community, and created some graduate programs there as well. Coming back, I've been working with the community engagement, and I'm the director this year of the Masters of Nonprofit Management. But I was very frustrated because I was hearing from community organizations that they were in bad need of volunteers. So we began activating our networks to get, and I talked with faculty about how we could reactivate civic engagement at the height of the pandemic and the height of the lockdown. And so also, as you know, George Floyd's murder took place at that time. We had workshops on racial justice that we that both on campus and in the community, and that engagement dramatically reactivated a lot of the students. Who then our enrollment actually increased because people came back to the university, even if it was completely online. This is just some examples of what was done during the with civic engagement, even during the pandemic. Okay.
Well, these two aren't, but I mean, we still were working at food bank, but we were social distancing protocols.
Yeah, but they were social distance.
Those pictures are not of that. So I'd like to just, too, before we move to the question section of the presentation, talk about a little bit more, Bill, about the leadership sort of identifying through that appreciative inquiry process after your initial strategic planning and asking people, what do we do well and how can we do more of it? And taking those microcosms of what was happening around service and engagement and coupling that with the questions that you originally came and posed to set strategic planning in place, guiding towards HIPS, how that really helped to build the center and solicit funding from the state and start to fund faculty initiatives so that they could be supported, and how it affected the influence, the rank and tenure, and cross-functional units, not just faculty or student services, but bringing everyone together to work on across the institution to showcase all of these incredible things that were going on before in silo. You could just speak to that for a minute before.
Well, just that and the vision stays the same, and there have been other presidents. Back, a new one has just started this week. So every president, reshapes the university somewhat. I don't know how the new president is going to reshape it, but the reality of it is that you have to structure things in policy, tenure and promotion. You have to put into the mission and into the vision, so that tied into the core fabric and heart and soul of the university is a commitment to civic engagement. And I think that's where, unfortunately, it tends to fail, because a president leaves or a provost leaves or a dean leaves, a new one comes in, and that's not their priority. And it has to be central. And that's where the faculty and staff are so critical. I, as president, convened meetings of center directors, really the first time that it happened, to begin to discuss how can we have a university-wide impact, and how can I help them, and help them either as staff or as faculty. How could we be more successful in engaging them? And Noel, who was an assistant dean at that time, she co-chaired the committee that we created to basically tag courses of service learning and civic engagement courses. And that continues today.
Yeah, so students actually have a service resume coming out of the institution, which is really helpful when they're going to look for their first jobs. And some of the organizations that we were involved with that you could engaged to also help promote this on your campus, or supports are listed here. But Bill, why don't we turn it over to some of the questions, Kimberly, maybe that have come up and
Yeah, I wanted one just popped up here from Wissam, and there's some before, so I'll go back through those and maybe Patty and Jan can start to
Okay.
look, but I'll go ahead and tackle the Wissam. I'll read it for you. How do you change the mindset of a student who is convinced they are in college for job and career to a mindset that appreciates the process of knowledge acquisition and development, discovery, and then situate all this in a context of democracy?
Mm.
A job is concrete, democracy seems fluid and abstract. Your work is an example of an answer, but I feel most of my students are in a different mindset space. The main concern is grade.
Well, I think most students, the main concern is getting a job, keeping a job, being able to move up the ladder. And I think one of the things you want to do is early on get them engaged. The best way to do that, as Noel mentioned, tie it into, if you've got a freshman experience, integrate service learning into the freshman experience. Get the career center involved so that they're talking about careers and internships as you're talking about engagement. And they start to see engagement for career as one element of the broader engagement at university.
I have an example, Bill, of a faculty member that didn't realize who's been participating in service learning for many years. So when we created our committee to start looking at and defining what service was, and so, you know, this was a precursor to the rank and tenure part. Like first we had to define what it was across the institution. And he said, I don't even know why I'm here. I don't know why my chair recommended me. And he worked in the engineering, and he sent his students out to work with the state on advising for bridge redesigns. And they were doing all these projects with the state unpaid and integrating completely into what the community needed and what the SLOs were, student learning outcomes, for his course. And their projects were aligned with the state around what was happening with bridge redesign. And I said, you are the epitome of what we're talking about. Now all we have to do is talk about why they're doing it and how it's relatable to what they'll be doing in the future. It's just the conversation. So they're not cognitively aware that what they're doing is service. They think they're just doing homework.
You can build these into career pathways. So as students are thinking into career pathways, they're taking service learning, you're talking about social problems, you're getting to understand those social problems so that they're
infrastructure is a social problem. Where we build our bridges and how we determine what we're doing through that in the downtown intersection, which UHD was situated under a bridge, completely displaced a homeless population. You know, you add those pieces to the conversation, and now we understand what we're doing. He was like, a light bulb went off for him, and he'd organized this for 10 years and was missing it himself, right? And so he created that contextual connection for his students after that.
Other questions or thoughts? Or maybe somebody else wants to respond.
Bill and Noel, I have a question. It's Patty. I just love what you said, Noel, about the contextual part. And I know that you are using the term service, and you refer back to service learning. And I know for a lot of folks who have been very much involved in service learning for many, many years, we've seen it change a bit over the past few years. And there has been sort of a new look, if you were, a revision of the model where, and I think you are saying it, but we're using different terminology in the sense of, would you say that a lot of this now is shifting much more to a project-based learning kind of model? Yes. And can you elaborate on a bit about that, and why do you see that happening?
So we, in the chapter that Dr. Lawrence and I wrote, we talked very distinctly about what community engagement is, right? It's just, we're committed to service. We can send the students out to volunteer. We can, do things in our home that support initiatives. And then what is the liberation, and how we were talking about societal issues and tying that to what we choose or not choose to do, and what is the influence of that work in the community, right? And then service learning is how we applying in a very real world, meaningful way what we're doing hands-on in with tied to the curriculum and the student learning outcomes for that course with their overall career goals and objectives. And so we're going to pose a problem. We're going to identify how we're going to resolve that issue, right? And then we're going to develop projects around that in the course. And that's how we defined it at UHD. And that's how we triangulated those three things to create deeper learning, which is, HIP's work was around, Ku's work is that if you can have learning communities and service and all of these different experiences happening for a student simultaneously, then it increases their chance of retaining, completing, and being engaged. And so we tied it all to these other overarching societal issues and problems is that macro level piece that we try to connect all the students to. When students came to us with issues and problems, we encourage staff and faculty to come up with things that were embedded in their coursework to address them.
If I could just say something too, that, I noticed one of the people, mentioned the word praxis, the application of theory and practice. Absolutely, that is correct. But also service, learning, and just civic engagement or volunteerism is not sufficient. It is just one aspect of what we need to develop engaged citizens. Public deliberation, as Harry talks about in his chapter and in his presentation, we want to develop a full range of democratic practices and broad understanding. The more engaged students are, the broader and deeper that their commitment is to making social change and structural change, the more successful we are with change. Otherwise, we've done a great disservice to students by showing them that, hey, if you go out and collect some canned foods, and that's important, that's a good starting point, but that's not going to solve hunger or poverty or homelessness. And so that's our responsibility as faculty, engaging them, showing them the deeper and complex problems that we face, and giving them avenues to participate in solving them.
And asking them, what are the problems you are facing? Because if you can tie it to something that's a real experience for them personally, that really helps them connect to the learning.
We have another participant who would like to unmute and ask the question directly. So Kendrick, would you like to ask your question?
Actually, it's a comment. The presentation about engagement and civic learning and its application to career pathways. And it really is interesting because I teach real estate and business at different colleges. And one of the things that you guys hit home about, what are some of the social issues and areas that society face in relation to a lot of businesses, and especially in real estate now. We're talking a lot about fair housing and systemic and institutional racism. Yep. And the conversation you guys brought up, it brought me to the point of what's going on in Georgia right now with voter suppression. Yep. And now how a lot of these companies are taking upon themselves this corporate social responsibility to actually engage with their stakeholders and to the people saying, hey, this is what's going on based on a lie, right? We shouldn't be doing this voter suppression, and it's wrong. And a lot of companies have started speaking out. And there's been a lot of backlash and pressure on a lot of companies to say, hey, the PGA Masters is not going to be in Georgia this year because unless they change their ways, and giving that political pressure. So I think the student engagement in that learning, it's a real experience for them, especially for those that are in business majors, because they have to think, okay, so I want to be social justice, but I also want to make a profit. How could I do that?
Right. And so inviting stakeholders to the table for community forums is one of the places we started with that, because we invited business leaders and nonprofit leaders and people that were in the field already as experts. And this is similarly the way we reconstructed our MBA and Masters in Nonprofit, is bringing all these leaders together with students in the same room with the local politicians from both sides of the aisle, saying, what can we do? What assets do we have? What strengths do we have? Rather than looking at everything from a deficit approach, and then respecting everybody's opinion and ideas around, there's a whole thing about how you do public deliberation so that it's equitable, and people can sort of reframe and rethink together collectively so that we come to an understanding, right? In that exchange,
Yeah.
in that interaction of that communication that occurs. And then, you know, incredible things happen out of that, is that we stop being people on two sides of a line, and we start being people that understand what the issues are for everybody in the community. And then, you know, when you tie that to the learning and then the marketable skills, it really helps people to start understanding those spaces, right?
I'll give you an example in that some students, we have a class, in fact, we have a grant for sustainability, a USDA grant. And the grant itself just pays for students to help build some community gardens and a few other things. But we wanted it to be broader. So we had students look at redlining, but also greenlining, also food deserts, and mapping them and recognizing that these things are structural. It's not just that there's the food deserts just happen. How do we get these vacant communities that suddenly are gentrified and rezoned or eliminated, so the students begin to understand that there is a process that is wiping out communities?
And they're not exempt from that political process.
Right.
Business
Exactly.
owners are not exempt from politics, right? So
Yes.
it's just, and it's not taking a side. It's just saying you can be active in this process.
Yes, of course. Even Ben and Jerry's has made a statement on their website about their support for Black Lives Matter and the contributions that they make. It's amazing time where a lot of people are starting to be aware of these things. And when you're talking about redlining, I mean, it's still a problem. Even though the Fair Housing Act of 1968 is supposed to stop that, we still see that big racial divide and gap in wealth. From Hawaiian Gardens to Irvine, just those two cities that I compare it to, it's very different. And the wealth gap is huge, especially with school resources. So I commend you for that. Thank you for allowing me to comment. I'll put my mic on.
Really enjoyed your question.
So I think you have convinced all of us. And where we are is where Randall is in terms of, okay, so how do we start this from scratch? And given that our colleagues in their classes feel overwhelmed, and this will take some extra work and time on their part, do you have some initial steps that you might recommend to us to bring more people to the table, to inspire them like you've inspired us?
Well, there are many people that have participated with us in the book, and if you take a look at some of the chapters,
Case studies,
that you might invite some of the people. You know, Harry is one. Also, one of the people that we have worked with very closely, Azuri Gonzalez at UTEP. Her work has really, over a 20-year period, helped to deepen civic engagement and make it part of the core fabric at University of Texas at El Paso. There are many other people doing some really fabulous work.
I would also look for the other colleagues, possibly. There may, you know, rather than listening to the naysayers, we were always looking for those little rough gems, and maybe people that were doing little things here and there, project-based learning, and they didn't realize how they could just enhance it just a little bit and integrate these other pieces and make it so much more impactful. And so part of that was my instance of you know, helping this faculty member in engineering understand that what he was really doing, but he wasn't articulating that for the students. They weren't getting the full experience because they weren't thinking cognitively about the impact, right? And they weren't aware that these marketable skills engaging with community was enhancing the downtown. And so I think, you know, finding peers that have a similar type of mindset, or inviting speakers to come in and share information. Resources is huge.
Yes.
You never discount resources and feeling supported. And so Identifying revenue streams. Some of these organizations we made reference to earlier have grants and things you can apply for, because everybody's resource needy, and so identifying resources helps too. And we were very siloed when Bill came to UHD and I came to UHD, and so when we started to have a collective voice and establish, then that we were able to establish the center, and then it became like a clearinghouse, and there was funding and support. It just sort of evolved over time. It didn't happen overnight. It was many years. We're sort of minimizing an effort of about 5 years, Bill, right? Before we got to where you really, from when you came in. And then leadership, once you find your advocates and your colleagues that have similarly situated interests in these goals, then advocating and working with students and getting their voice involved.
Okay.
I just posted the link to the book. That's at Amazon. It's more expensive there than if you get it sometimes from the publisher. Definitely if you buy it from the publisher, for 10 copies, things like that. But also the paperback will be out in July, maybe August, but they tell us it's supposed to come out sometime near the end of July. So look for it. And I mentioned that one of the things that I've worked on since this process was a sort of a checklist that you can do on your campus to see where are you at. And I would encourage you, if you haven't gone through the Carnegie process for community engagement, please do, because there's two different categories: curricular as well as academic. As well as co-curricular.
Yeah.
And so if you go through that, it's really in many respects like a special emphasis for accreditation. And what it does is it helps you to understand better. You do basically an audit of community service, and then you see, is it in your statement? Is it in your mission statement? Is it in your value statement? Is it in your vision? Is it in your tenure and promotion? Is it in the promotion criteria for staff, et cetera, et cetera? Get the campus committed to doing that, and it's going to help you from there on. Get into Campus Compact, because they have a civic planning process. Get the campus to do a civic plan, a civic engagement plan. All of these are tools that are really helpful to campuses. And I wish all of you good fortune in doing that.